you brought a bit of a gift here with this book. Can you share both like a little bit about your background, like what you're doing here in Seoul, and then tell me a little bit about what you brought with you?
Ah, yeah, sure. So I come from Kazakhstan and I'm of Korean descent. So both of my parents were Korean, ethnically Korean,
Hmm.
and all of my grandparents are ethnically Korean. So kind of like we always were taking pride in that being like, 100% Korean. But by DNA test, it turns out it's not true, but that's, yeah, I know, I will elaborate on this later. So
Ah, interesting.
yeah, I come from southern eastern part of Kazakhstan,
Okay.
so which is called like a city called Taldykurgan, which is if you know Almaty, which
Hmm.
is like the biggest city in Kazakhstan, it's like 300 kilometers away from it, which is considered close in
Okay.
terms of like Kazakhstan territory, like distances. So I come from the southern eastern part, which is close to Almaty. And yeah, I came to Korea in 2016 to study.
Hmm.
I got a scholarship, generous scholarship from Busan University. So PNU, they came to our school, and we had a school system, like high school system, like not only high school but middle school,
Hmm.
high school system, which were named after our first president. So it's called Nazarbayev Intellectual School, and I studied there, and I just happened to be in one of the. It's a network of schools, so I happened to be in the Almaty school,
Hmm.
and like PNU, for some reason they came to that school and they were introducing themselves like we are the Korean university, PNU, one of the best universities in Korea.
Hmm.
And yeah, they were asking like, do you guys want scholarships? Do you guys want to come to Korea? And before that, I did come to Korea in 2000. I believe it was 2014.
Okay.
So I came in 2014 on all overseas Korean friends, and I loved Korea. I liked it, even though it was Chanma. It was July,
Hmm.
so it was the worst season possible to come to Korea. It's like hot, humid,
Yeah.
raining all day, so you can't
Mm.
really go out using umbrellas all the time. And but then I liked it, and I came in 2016 to study.
Hmm.
So I like there was a math exam, and there was a like written exam or something that
Yep.
PNU conducted at the school. And yeah, I just happened like to take the first place and got like a good scholarship for like to study. And
Interesting.
yeah,
Was the both your like hometown where you grew up in and the high school that you went to, is that area like are there a lot of ethnically Korean people there? Is that why like the PNU was there is because there was a large Korean diaspora population
that's a
or
great question. Yeah.
what was it like? Or do most of the Koreans in Kazakhstan are they in that region that you're from?
That's a great question because yeah, you're spot on. I think most of Koreans are located like towards south
Uh-huh.
of Kazakhstan, not really so many in the northern part, but because it's been already like couple like almost 100 years since they were resettled from Russia,
Hmm.
it's they have spread, but most of them are still concentrated in Almaty and because it's like economic center.
Hmm.
So, but the thing is, my school originally like Taldykurgan, my hometown school. It's like it's a lot of Koreans there, a lot of Koreans.
Hmm.
Like half of my class was Koreans,
Wow.
ethnically Koreans, which was crazy, mind-boggling to people to realize that half of our class is like ethnically Koreans. What's going on?
Hmm.
And there were a lot of Koreans because it's like intellectual school, and Koreans are like famous for being good at studying.
Yeah.
So all the Korean families they wanted their kids to go to that school, so they ended up like being really concentrated. So ethnically Korean,
Huh.
we were like sometimes, yeah. In my case, we were the majority. But then when I went to Almaty school, it wasn't like that. So in Almaty school, there were many, ethnic Koreans, but it's like quite sparse. It's not
Hmm.
a lot of them. It's not the majority.
And it's Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan both have pretty large like Korean diaspora
Yeah,
populations, right?
very large. It's like nothing compared to, of course, Chinese diaspora. It's like 2.8 million or something, or
Sure.
American diaspora, which is like 2.5 or something too.
Yeah.
But the Central Asian diaspora is like half a million, at least half a million strong. So it's Kazakhstan has like 150,000. Then
Mm.
Uzbekistan has, I believe, like 200,000,
Wow.
and then
Yeah.
Russia has another 150,000, stuff like that.
Mm.
So they are spread across mostly like Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. Like Uzbekistan is the biggest, then Russia, probably then Kazakhstan, and then Kyrgyzstan.
Mm.
So it's like post-Soviet Union countries. Yeah.
The reason why I was excited to meet you was one because of your background, but also I've met a few like Korean Kazakhstan or
Yeah.
Korean Uzbekistan people, but usually English like conversational level
Yeah.
is a little bit tricky. Um, your English is like, I mean, you're basically fluent. So like, what was that from schooling or just like personal interest? What's the reason why your English is basically like conversational fluent level?
Thank you, thank you. I'm flattered to hear that from a native speaker. So yeah, actually, that's another interesting thing. My teacher of English was firstly was of course like it was a Russian lady, and then was a Korean lady. So my teacher is ethnically Korean, and she was a teacher of English, and she basically like taught me all the basics and everything, like everything, the solid foundation I had in English. And after that, I just I really was always interested in English myself, but I didn't really study it, aside from school. So school is basically the first place that taught me English. I mean, before that, I tried to learn some words because my mom was Korean, and she was like, learn English. You will need this one day.
Yeah.
Learn as many languages as possible because now your memory is like so flexible and stuff.
Yep.
So she made me learn English, but it didn't, come to fruition until I went to school. So when I went to school in 5th grade, we started learning, and I just like felt like, it goes easy for me. Like I can grasp it really easily. And then when I came to Busan to study, I majored in global studies. So everyone was speaking English. Yeah, that's how it happened.
Your peers, like your friend group that you grew up with in Kazakhstan area. I guess two questions. One, in terms of their like conversational level in English, are most of them, is that like a dominant language that you guys speak? And also like in terms of the friends that you had, were they mostly other ethnically Korean people, or were they like, I guess, other heritages as well? What was your friend group like when you were growing up?
Interesting question. So my friend group, it did have a lot of Koreans, ethnic Koreans, because I just always happened to be in a class like studying with other guys, other ethnic Koreans. But it wasn't like, it was case by case. There were classes which had no ethnic Koreans and stuff like that. But my class always somehow happened to have some ethnic Koreans, so I was friends with them. But our group usually was discriminatory. It's like everyone is welcome. It just happens that ethnic Koreans are like the majority. That's why we're mostly ethnic Koreans. But when we were growing up, definitely wasn't like English wasn't our second language. It was the third language. But we have this policy of 3 languages, education in Kazakhstan. So they make you learn 3 languages, Russian, Kazakh, and Kazakh, Russian, depending on which class you go to, because there are Kazakh, mostly like Kazakh language classes, and there are Russian language classes, or Russian taught classes. So you, by the way, class, when I say class, it's different from America, because America, it has class system, like you go to class, and that class is like, math 101,
right,
or something like that. But when I'm talking about class, it's like a group of people that just go through education together, go to the same classes. So it's Soviet system. You go to the same class, like go to the same curriculum with the same people. So that's what I call class, like not really class 101 or something.
I see.
So yeah, and English was our third language. Yeah, but we were always, emphasizing English because everyone was speaking English.
Yep.
Like in developed countries, and we just wanted to go there to study one day, so we all knew that English is a priority. Yeah.
And what about Korean language? Was that of the peers? So I guess most people in Kazakhstan and also Uzbekistan are like, what, 3rd or 4th, maybe further down generation-wise?
Yeah, they're third. I'm actually I'm 3rd generation. Like officially, I'm 3rd generation, even though I'm not supposed to be by age. It's because my dad was born pretty late. And my granddad, he's pretty old. That's why he was 1st generation. Then my dad is 2nd. Then I'm 3rd. So my dad already didn't speak Korean. My parents didn't speak Korean because their parents, they prioritized Russian over anything else. They wanted to, to settle in Soviet Union and then in post-Soviet space, and that's why they didn't prioritize learning Korean.
Yep.
My granddad once tried to teach me Korean and he gave up because he was like, okay, like I cannot do that. I cannot do that. And I was just so bad at Korean because even back then I thought, why would I need it? Like, why would I need Korean? And then at school, somehow at a Kazakh school, they tried to teach Korean language because the ties with Korea were growing. And so they introduced this school-wide Korean language classes. But when we went there, we were like, why would we need Korean ever? Like, I would go to America to study or something. And that was like Murphy's Law, and it's like in its best, best
illustration or example or something like that.
example. Yeah, it's like Murphy's Law. I
Yeah.
needed Korean because I came to Korea to study.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we didn't study Korean. Like I went to courses separately, but among ethnic Koreans, it wasn't really. It's not popular to go to Korean courses. Like they prefer to go to Russian universities or maybe English universities, like Western universities. But nobody that I know of, like my close friends, almost none of them went to Korean courses. But when they go to Korean courses, it's usually Koreans and mostly Koreans, mostly ethnic Koreans.
And so you brought a bit of a gift here, unexpected. Can you tell me a little bit about what this is?
So this is my dad's book that he wrote in 2010. And he wrote it, originally it's called Привет, Кореец, which is translated roughly as Hi Korean. And basically, like, the name of the book is tricky because I'm pretty sure that in America or in the West, they don't say like, Hi Korean. They don't say it to you, right? It's racist, right?
Right.
So, but in Kazakhstan and Soviet Union, sometimes some racist people used to say like, Hi Korean. Like they used to identify you as Korean rather than a person. So I heard it.
Would they say Korean or would they? Because like in the U.S. or when I went to like Latin America, they would say like, "Oh, hi, Chino,"
Oh,
right?
Chino,
Like some Chinese
Chino, yeah.
person. But in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, maybe because Koreans are so much more prevalent, they say "Hi, Korean."
It's like Korean as a word in itself, and like identifying anyone by race, like nationality, is kind of a slur, like kind of a cuss word, like not cuss word, but you really don't usually say like hi Kazakh or hi Russian. It's racist, right? And people start like getting triggered.
Sure.
So Koreans do get triggered when they're called Koreans, just because everyone gets triggered when they're called by their nationality. There are like racial slurs other than that, kind of like dog eater or like pepper eater, whatever, like slit-eyed, and some people do that, like your eyes are like slits, and you don't see anything. So they do that too.
I gotcha. Okay. And so you were explaining the title of this, and so your dad wrote this book?
Yeah, he wrote this book, and actually the beginning of this book, I think it was me who happened to be around the TV one day when I was a kid, and my dad wrote, "I must admit, what finally pushed me to write this book was a small yet painful feeling of frustration that lingered after watching a television program about national minorities." So then he goes on to say, that the journalist confidently demonstrated his knowledge of the topic, presented some historical facts to the audience, that the resettlement was voluntary, that it took place in 1940, that Koreans supposedly took their time to carefully choose a location before deciding to move, and that upon arrival at their new home, they were welcomed with bread and salt, all of which was not true. And he says he would be okay with that if I didn't happen to be around the TV, like just roaming around. And if I didn't happen, like he says, my son, who was at the YYY stage of childhood, happened to be wandering around next to the TV. He seemed uninterested in the adult-oriented program, but as I later found out, he heard everything. And then he says, he compared the information from the program with the stories his grandfather had told him, weighed it all, and came to the wrong conclusion. So I came to the wrong conclusion back then. I was like, okay, so my granddad is lying. That was all a BS, like the TV tells the truth, and the truth is different from what my granddad said. And that's why my granddad is wrong. So I came to this wrong conclusion, and my dad was like, okay, I should write a book.
Wait, but what was the conclusion, or what was your grandfather saying compared to your dad, and what were the differences?
No, my grandfather told the stories which are different from what the journalists said.
I see.
What the media says about resettlement of Koreans.
Yes.
And then I compared those two, and they
Yes.
were not consistent with each other.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So how it is different is Koreans were resettled forcefully. It wasn't voluntary. It wasn't you choose a place and we will just move you to that place and we'll give you enough ample time to gather your belongings or anything. It was really you have 2 hours, go. And Stalin just came in and for some unknown reasons, which were probably motivated by the whole thing with Korea being close to Japan and geographically that region, and it was kind of getting out of hand with some Japanese spies doing something there because they were looking Korean and stuff like that. But it was motivated by something, and at least that government at that time, Soviet government, it said it's because of this. It's because you guys are not reliable.
Wow.
And Koreans like wrote entire poems to the government, like, and letters, like, how do we deserve this to happen to us? And then they were just yanked and resettled, like, across Soviet Union. Yeah.
In Kazakhstan, is like the Korean minority, are they like, I guess, the dominant minority? Like, are there other minority groups as well in Kazakhstan that are of equal size to the Korean minority, or bigger?
Yeah, pretty big. Kazakhstan used to be like a melting pot for Soviet Union because everyone was like sent to Kazakhstan when they were, you know, just resettled, or yeah, basically like they took the template of resettlement and they applied it to Chechen people. They applied it to some Russian people. Like Russian people were resettled to Kazakhstan since like middle of the 19th century, I believe. So they were just flooded, like Kazakhstan was just flooded with people of other ethnicities, other nationalities, because it was a huge territory with sparse, like, with not a lot of people. So there were a couple, like, maybe up to 10 million of local population. Then they just flooded the country with people of other ethnicities. So definitely, it used to be like 30%, I believe, of Russian population, which is pretty big, or maybe up to 40%. My dad says his school had like the majority were non-Kazakh, non-local people.
Really?
So it was like up to you could have 30 people and only 2 of them would be like Kazakh.
Huh.
So he says that was the story back then, at least for his time. So definitely there are a lot of minorities, like 130 nationalities or something that live in Kazakhstan. Yeah.
Wow. And so it was your grandparents that first moved from Korea to Kazakhstan, and then your dad was born in Kazakhstan?
Yeah, basically, like my grandparents' parents. My grandparents were born still in Korea or the Far East. They don't know themselves like precisely because their parents just told them, we already came here with you.
Yeah.
But maybe it was, you know, time-wise, maybe it was like different. So basically, I tend to think that they were born in the Far East of Russia already, and then they were resettled with their parents to Kazakhstan. And then my dad was born in Kazakhstan.
And so then, like, even in these Korean diaspora communities, like the one that you grew up in, then Korean, language-wise, is it spoken at all? Like your grandparents, do they
only among
speak
grandparents,
it?
yeah.
Ah.
And a part of my dad's generation, like his older brothers, they do speak Korean, but like there was some kind of like cutoff line. I don't know for what reason, but people who were born, let's say after 60, like 1960,
Yep.
they mostly like don't speak Korean at all. They maybe understand. My mom understands Korean, like the ancient Korean that my grandparents speak, but she doesn't speak herself. So mostly it was Russian. Mostly it's Russian spoken among Korean diaspora.
And do you know why, I guess, like both sides of your grandparents ended up, or I guess it's like your great grandparents initially decided to move into that region? And is the story for most of the other like Korean diaspora, like Kazakhstani people, is it kind of similar in terms of they were all moving together? Do you know much about the migration like motives?
Yeah, I think it was written here somewhere too that some of them, it was happening along like several decades of migration. It wasn't like one thing. It wasn't one occurrence. So some people ran from the government, from Korean government. Some people ran from Japanese occupation. Some people were like just, you know, all of my family moved, so I gotta move too. So I think like those are the 3 main reasons. And yeah, if you watch Harbin, like Harbin, the movie about Harbin, like
I haven't watched
yeah,
it.
there is a movie which was released recently about Korean like liberty freedom fighters that ended up assassinating a Japanese emperor. Which is not really a spoiler because like it's a historical event. It's just like how it happened is the most important part. So it was, I believe in the movie it was 1910, and they were cooperating with Russian like Koreans, some of the Russian Koreans in the Far East to make it happen.
Wow.
So I believe it's like a mixture of factors that pushed them out of Korea or made it enticing for them to move to Russia. My dad says it's because Russians were lenient and like the Tsar government, like the Imperial Russia, it was lenient with Koreans and it was giving them land and it was just trying to protect them from Japanese, really. So Yeah, I think that's the main motivation. Yeah, to answer the question.
And then, so this book, like, do you know, like, how recently your dad kind of put this together? And was the intention mostly for familial purposes, or like, is it distributed across the diaspora community in Kazakhstan?
That's a good question. I think mostly it was written for familiar purposes because the number of copies was not really impressive. It was mostly given among family and friends. And some of my classmates actually read this book without knowing that it was my dad.
Really?
Yeah, so some of my classmates were ethnic Koreans and they were like somehow got this book and they were like, wow, this is so interesting, like the stories and everything.
Yeah.
And the author is like a guy called Albert Kim. And they were like, Albert Kim, who, like, do you happen to know him? And I'm like, yeah, I just happen to know him. I just so happen to be his son. Yeah.
That's so funny. Oh, wow. This is cool. And so I guess the context of the book is it primarily about like the relocation process of the Koreans or in Kazakhstan, or are there other stories as well that are explained here? Because you just brought this today, right? So
Yeah,
I haven't
just
had a
read it.
chance to
Yeah,
dive
right,
into
right.
it, but I'm going to.
But that's a gift to you. It's not really finalized, so I still have to edit a lot of stuff because it was translated with GPT, and some things
really?
it's pretty accurate.
Cool.
But some things were like a little bit off, like a little bit not the way my dad wanted them to sound, probably in Russian. So wait, what was the question again?
Just in terms of like the contents, like you said, the purpose was because what your grandfather was telling you in terms of the story of how you guys got to, let's say, your homeland in Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
It was very different from what the media was telling you.
Yeah.
Is that the entirety of this, or are there other stories embedded within this book as well?
There are definitely other stories, like from my dad's childhood and the way he realized like there is a part of history of Koreans, resettlers that he doesn't know. So that's a part of the story too, because he was like a teenager, I believe, when he like really realized, got to know the truth about like Koreans being resettled and stuff. So there are definitely other stories, and I believe the second part of the book is it might be misleading for some people who read it. It might be like confusing for them because they're like, why do you talk about stuff like, upbringing or like some customs of Korean people, like, or maybe things like how to do sports and stuff. Like here it says sports or hygiene. Why do you do that? And at first, I actually asked the same question. I'm like, Dad, why did you like dedicate the second half of the book? Like the first half was so interesting. It's full of stories. It's all very like, flashy. I went there, and the stories are written beautifully. So, and then the second half is like basically like, you brush your teeth and like do this, do that, and do sports and grow up like this. And I'm like, why did you do that? And he's like, because that is, I believe I actually have to revisit this because the conversation was pretty old. I believe he said that this is what it means to be Korean. Like in his understanding. I'm not saying like, I'm not speaking for South Koreans or North Koreans, but like Koreans in Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So he said, yeah, this is what it means to be Korean. Like be disciplined, do sports, do activities, like be smart, excel at education, and then build a good future for your kids and stuff like that. That's in his understanding what it is to be Korean.
So from his perspective, it was kind of like passing down a cultural identity as it relates to like Koreans in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, and even like small things like customs and premonitions and all the superstitions, even like all those things that come from Korean heritage. Like he wanted to pass it down to me, like my brother and my sister, so to the three of us, and then by proxy maybe to other people in our diaspora.
Wow. And did your dad, did he and like your mom take trips to Korea, or did you guys have any familial roots like that you're in contact with in Korea?
Unfortunately, no. I know that you have some, right?
Yes. Like my paternal grandfather's sister is in Incheon.
That's
and so
crazy.
I kind of knew that there were some distant relatives here. But when I came here, that wasn't the intent. So it was a very unusual experience, but it was cool.
That's pretty cool. Like to reunite you with your family, and you have completely different worldviews, like,
Yes.
right?
Well, it was super helpful that My grandpa's younger sister, she had a daughter, and she was at the Seoul holiday kind of dinner that we had, and she could speak English. If she couldn't speak any English, it would have been a very awkward situation. So it was cool. It was really cool. Yeah.
So did you notice like anything like in your culture that is just stands out compared to your relatives?
I mean, I wish I could have had the language dynamic is very tricky. I think just in general being here in Korea, like I'm reminded how American my mindset is, with certain things.
Exactly, yeah.
And I wonder with you too, because even I would say people would classify me as quite extroverted here in Korea.
Yeah.
But back in the States, I'm like very, very introverted.
Oh, wow.
And so I noticed like a bit of a difference hopping between those cultures. And then with respect to like work or just projects or like when you encounter a problem, like my mindset is always like, how can I somehow influence the environment so that I can solve the problem? And I feel like a lot of people in Korea kind of take the like the backdrop as a given. Even in like a company context, it's the same mindset that I would have where when I was working for, a company in the States, it would be like, how do I, influence the decision maker so that I can get the outcome that I want, But I feel like that kind of approach isn't, like second nature, or it's not really thought of. By like Korean people.
Yeah, it sounds to them like more opportunistic than than just like trying to get your stuff done.
Yes,
it's like, oh, are you trying like to hop the ladder or something?
Cheat the game or something?
Cheat the game?
Yeah.
Are you trying to trick, or are you trying to talk to my manager to complain about me or something?
Yes.
Yeah, that's definitely like what goes through. I think what goes through their mind.
Yes.
At this point in time, yeah.
The language barrier does prove an issue, though, in terms of making a very specific assessment of the cultural differences. Because I imagine if I could speak Korean fluently, they would be more apparent.
Definitely, and the language would be more like I'm really not trying to imply anything, but I just wanted to talk to the man. It would be a really lengthy explanation.
Yes.
And all of my professors at university, they complained about like Korean emails being this long when it's like this much substance. They're like, why do you like ask me about my day or stuff like that? Why do you start from so far?
Yes.
Like be direct.
Yes.
Like be to the point.
Yes.
But Korean language is like, oh, I'm like not trying to do anything here.
Yes.
그거 그냥 물어보고 싶지만 and like and then what they want.
Yes. And that's something that I still probably haven't been forced to get used to, because from a working perspective, I'm just working on Cambridge for the most part, and all the people that I interact with are like Korean diaspora types of people like yourself. So I haven't had to deal with that too much, but man, I think it would be quite tricky and difficult for me to like socialize myself in that way
with local Koreans.
Well, in a work context specifically, just because like even in the States, if I were, depending on the companies that I was working for, right, I much preferred startup environment where I can just have conversations with the decision makers and I can propose
come
changes.
Up to someone and just say,
yes, rather than going through like layers of bureaucracy.
Exactly.
That drives me crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think both have their advantages, because in Korea then you know exactly like how decisions are made.
Yes.
And nobody can like screw with you or something. It makes people less opportunistic actually. It's like the whole culture of like merit, like the merit based culture. It didn't really take off here, even though it was imported from the United States, because the United States is like all about merit, right? All about your achievements, all about like how you present yourself.
Yes.
But then Korea was like, no, actually, like we don't care. So even if you do some merit, there is still a line of people before you that should be promoted, not you.
Yes.
So definitely, like it introduced some discipline, but at the same time, like sometimes you really want to stand out and you just can't.
Yeah. Well, and that default for having structure is also like pretty evident within society at large. Whereas like the first handful of questions that you typically get asked is like age right? Like maybe like relationship status or like what
University
school you went to.
age.
Yeah. So it's like
자취하세요.
they-
Are you
they-
living alone?
the structure is nice of
Yeah.
like, okay, this person is this in this bucket, and this is how I should interact with them. Whereas, and even I think why some of the K-Bridge gatherings are interesting to some like Korean diaspora types of people is because it doesn't have that set structure. You know, like for me, mostly I'm curious about like what people's interests are, what experiences they've had, but in terms of treating them in a specific way because of like the school that they went to or because they're older than me, like that isn't second nature to me. At least not yet. Maybe that'll change over time.
It is a culture shock when
Yeah.
you come here and people ask you about university. Like, why do you care? Like, unless it's Ivy League, like, why would you care? And even if it's Ivy League, like, I'm pretty sure in America, like, nobody asks you about university, right? It's just, they naturally get to know that you're from Ivy League, and then it's like, whoa, nice.
Yes, I think so. I think that's right. I mean, or it'll take like a few conversations to get to that point, right?
Right.
Or maybe in like a professional context, they'll ask
Right.
you what university you went to and what major you studied,
Right.
But it's not like the first or second question that they'll ask you.
Right, definitely.
For you, when you were in Korea the first time, it was through a program,
Yeah.
right? And how old were you at that time?
16. I think it was 16. Yeah, I was 16.
And you were in Seoul, or where did you go?
It was a nice program actually, but some people got more lucky than I did. It was because we started all in Seoul. We all started in Seoul. We were roaming around, going to Tongdaemun, going to Sinan Bridge, like the music bridge. Have you been there?
No, I haven't.
It's actually quite nice. Yeah, I don't remember where exactly it is, but I will send you a location.
Okay.
So it's pretty nice to go there in the evening. And we went like around all the attractions, Namdaemun, Tongdaemun, and stuff like that. And then we were distributed around like across Korea. So I just happened to go to Gunsan, and Gunsan is it's not really impressive.
Where is that within Seoul or is somewhere else?
No, Gunsan is like I believe it's like the western, western coast, like West Coast.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's West Coast, and I went to Gunsan. It's like 150,000 people. It's a very small city, and their most, the biggest attraction is a bridge, which is full of spiders and full of webs, cobwebs. And I was like, okay, I'm not impressed really. But some people got to go to Daegu, which is still not that good, but okay, better than Gunsan. I mean, in terms of attractions, like Daegu is a wonderful city itself. And some people got to go to Busan, which is basically like a mega city, like 3 million people.
Yep.
It's big. It has a lot to offer. But I was just sitting there like in Gunsan, yeah.
And that was like a week long or something?
Yeah,
like that?
a week long. Yeah.
Okay.
It was pretty interesting. It was a homestay, and I think the homestay thing was the very first time I encountered completely like different way of living and completely different mindset. It's, I mean, in Korea, it was unique. It was so unique. It's like the way they interact with each other is unique. The way they interact with you is unique. So they technically give you a room, but because I didn't speak Korean, they didn't talk to me. It's just like, okay, here's your room, bye-bye. And like, that's it. And there was no mosquito net in summer. I was suffering a lot, man. It was like 20 mosquitoes on me every single second. I just sprayed, like they were considerate enough to give me a spray, like a mosquito spray. And then they shut themselves off, like, they shut the part off. Basically saying, okay, bye-bye, and closing the door. And I'm like, okay, I'm screwed. And there was no mosquito net, and the window could not be closed. And I couldn't even complain about this. So...
But were you there with other people like yourself, like that were on this program as well?
There was Mexican Korean from Mexico.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I believe she was mixed, half. And so we stayed in the same household but in different rooms. And they talked to her because she could speak a little bit of Korean. They talked to her all night, like until like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. or something. And I was just
so it was the language. It was the language issue.
Language issue. And when we woke up, and I was just like, I was a teenager and I was very self-conscious, so I didn't really want to take shower too often, and I showered like once every 2 days or something. And for Koreans, it's like what 1 every 2 days, like once every 3 days. Once every 2 days maybe is acceptable. Once every 3 days, no, that's not acceptable. And they just happened to notice that for some reason. And like at the end of the trip, I got as a present, I got a bunch of soaps. Like they were quite expensive, but there was a bunch of soaps, and I was like, nah, shit, like, I'm sorry, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, you're fine.
I'm like,
you're
shit,
fine.
like, guys, like, why the hell? Like, what does it mean? I trying to imply that I'm like smelling or something. I literally showered like 2 times when I was staying for 5 days. Like, is it that bad? Well, I was a teenager, so yeah.
They get some information about like where you're from and who you are before they come
beforehand. Yeah.
Do you feel like from a perception perspective, like in terms of whether it's Koreans from Soviet Union area that come back, that there's some sort of like stigma or view that they have, like, that you've noticed, or do you think that was just like a one-off situation?
It's a one-off situation. It's like a really weird situation. I'm pretty sure I didn't smell or anything. I was extra careful about that. My mom was like, never smell or anything. Yeah. She was really like conscious about that. Like, you go to Korea, don't put our like family's honor down or something. And yeah, so I think the stigma, like, if it is there, it's not bad. It's not that bad. It's like, oh, you guys are Korean. Okay, yeah. Like, Koreans from Soviet Union, from Russian space. Yeah, Russian speaking, that's okay. So there is a stigma about Chosunchok though. Like, Koreans from China. There is a big stigma about them because they were the first ones, I believe, to like the first diaspora to be invited into Korea, like to be given visas and stuff, just like reached out to, and they flooded like Korean crime market. So they just brought this, crime culture. They became like syndicates. They started syndicates here. They started crime and stuff. And so there is a stigma attached to them. But to Korean, not so much. I would say the hierarchy goes like, there is like some kind of like social hierarchy, like how to treat people. The hierarchy goes Kyopo, like Western Koreans. They're like...
Oh, I didn't know that was a difference. So the Kyopo is Western Korean, and Korean is...
Yeah, Korean is like the Central Asia Korean.
Okay.
Russia, Kazakhstan, like post-Soviet Union Korean. So I would say Korean get it better than most of other foreigners here. Kyopo get it the best though, because they're like usually rich, usually like well off, and usually they don't work, dirty jobs. But Korean, when they come, many of them do dirty jobs, like going to the field and like doing alba, carrying logs and stuff. But Kyopo mostly do company jobs, like high, what was it called? Like white collar jobs?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Makes sense. And I guess despite the difficulties of that week-long experience, right, not being able to speak Korean and really interact with the family, and it not being the most like hospitable, you still really enjoyed being in Korea.
Actually, yeah, they were really nice. Maybe I gave the wrong impression. They were really nice to me.
Yeah,
they treated me well. It's just they didn't talk, and then at the end there was this weird gift. Which, to this day, I do understand that. Like, yeah, okay.
Do you know if the Korean Mexican girl she got the same gift, or
I'm pretty sure she didn't get the same gift. I'm pretty sure. When they came out of the mall, she wasn't carrying the same. She wasn't carrying the same bag. No,
that's funny. That's funny.
I think it's like. Do you think it's like as a Korean coming from abroad? Do you think you can like spot some differences, some cultural things, quirks of Korean, like local Koreans, like Korean Koreans, that they do not notice themselves?
That they don't notice themselves. I mean, I'm sure there are things that I noticed. I mean, I feel like for me, when I came here, the things that were most obvious was just how strong the group dynamics are,
What do you mean by that, though?
Like, and I knew this before coming here, and it happens in like Korean American communities as well. But like, I went to a American multicultural church in Chicagoland area, so not very many Koreans like at all, right? But then coming to church here, and like same from a service perspective, and even the church that I went to here, it's like maybe half foreigners and then half like Korean diaspora type people, or Korean locals that can speak English well and are they just want to attend like a more multicultural church. But even for those groups, there's like specific groups that you need to be part of, like subgroups, right? And those subgroups are like very strong, where like the ties are really strong. Right, but if you're part of that group, that's kind of the group that you identify with.
No, this is like American subgroup within the church.
Yes. And I mean, like even for example, when I was in undergrad, like at Stanford, they have like a Korean Student Association for like international Koreans that come to the U.S., right? And then they have like a Korean American Student Association, right? And even within both of those organizations, usually they have like subgroups within them, and that's like your family, you know. And I feel like that's a very common thing. And as somebody who didn't really grow up in like even a Korean American community for the most part, is like that feels foreign to me, or it feels it's like a different way of socializing, and I'm just not used to it. So it's like makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. So there's like some things like that where I'm sure for Korean people it's just kind of normal, you know?
Yeah, I'm pretty normal. Yeah.
yeah.
Been here 9 years, man. I noticed. Yeah, it's like when from outside perspective, the reason why I asked this question is because maybe like it's my perspective only. I just wanted to check with you whether you're on the same page. It's sometimes I say something like, "Oh, you like Koreans like to do that," and people are like, "What do you mean?" Like, and Korean people are like, "What do you mean exactly?" And then I'm like starting to understand, like realize that, you know, from outsider perspective, sometimes you are able to notice their behavior patterns better than they do, because for them it's like it's default behavior.
Yes, and this is interesting because when I do talk to some like native Koreans born and raised that speak good English and maybe have even spent some time abroad, at least for me coming here, I have a tendency to just categorize Koreans as saying Koreans do this, Koreans do that, and sometimes they're like, "Why are you generalizing about Koreans so much?" But it's because that's the thing that stands out to me often, right? Are like those types of behaviors,
right?
But I guess for Korean people, it's just like that is just normal, right? Or they don't really notice those distinctions, so it seems weird for somebody to be pointing those out. So
for example, what things?
Like I mean, this is similar to the group dynamics, but there are like, I guess, like cults that happen. Like like there's a cultish tendency where there's like a leader and then there's a bunch of followers,
right?
And then the followers are like really like
they're really
crazy
devoted,
about the leader,
It's
right?
crazy how devout they are.
And I feel like you just see that in a bunch of places, right? It can be like in a company perspective. It could be in a religious context. It could be with some social organization, like political organization.
Right.
But I just like keep seeing like that phenomenon happen, and it's such a weird thing because it's not as. I mean, there are cults in the U.S. as well, right? But it's like you don't see it with the same amount of frequency and the same amount of like fervor as like the strength of it. And so like having observations like that is is an interesting thing.
Yeah, it ensures that most fun, because I thought initially you were talking about, you know, the religious cult.
Yeah.
And then when you started elaborating, I realized you're talking also about like the cults in the company and stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, yeah, that's exactly right. Like the whole situation with President Yoon, and how his party just like with such fervor, defending him, and all the, you know, demonstrations in Kwanhomun, like those people are just cannot be reasoned with, because they're already in that state, in the cult mindset.
Yeah.
Like they scream things like "We won! 우리가 이겼습니다!" Like we won! we're like our president is the president and stuff like that. I agree with you. I agree with you generally.
Yeah. I mean, you've been here for how many years? 6 years now?
9 years.
9 years?
It's gonna be 9 years this year. Yeah.
Wow. And do you feel like over time you have like changed a lot in terms of
behavior?
Yeah. You feel a lot more. I assume you feel a lot more like Korean now than compared to the first few years when you were in Busan and going to school.
I'd say most of the people like Korean, like the Soviet Koreans, like Russian Koreans, Russian speaking Koreans, they did adapt in some way, and they started, you know, adopting the local values and local practices. So some of them even speak like mixed. When they speak Russian, they like throw in some Korean words, and they have really developed nunchi. So one of the things definitely that I developed since coming here is nunchi. The sense. Like the things that are just unspoken, but you must not do them. For example, if you are like standing, if you're standing in a subway, you should not stand next to elderly if you can. Like the elderly seats, the 3 seats, like at the end of the train, like if you stand right in front of them, at least don't talk. So this is the kind of nunchi, because they show it to you with subtle ways. If you talk, they're like, why are you talking, man? But they don't say it. They're like,
Yes.
and doing like this, like
Yeah.
moving around, you know. And so this is one of the things that I just got to know, the nunchi,
Yeah.
the what is supposed to be done, what is not supposed to be done, the exact level of loudness you're allowed to be. Like the on subway you can call,
Yeah.
but if you exceed a certain decibel, and I can feel it, I can feel it when somebody is like too loud. It's crazy how, you know, how Korean society just polishes you,
Yes.
and makes you be a Korean
Yep.
without even touching you even once. Just shows to you continuously.
Yep.
This is nunchi. This is how you're supposed to behave. But after that, I just started to de-Koreanize myself sometimes, because
Oh, really?
sometimes it really is limiting for me in a professional setting. Let's say when I'm talking to my manager, to my boss,
Yes.
I'm like, 네 알겠습니다, 네 하겠습니다, 감사합니다.
Yeah.
And then I realize I didn't express my point of view all this way, because it's just so difficult to express it when you're always supposed to be like in a inferior position to your boss.
Yes.
And then it becomes difficult to, you know, de-Koreanize yourself in that moment and say like, 근데, like, but I have this point of view and stuff like that. And at that moment, I noticed that even my tone changes.
Yeah.
Because I come from like, 알겠습니다, 알겠습니다. I go to low pitch, like, oh, I actually have this suggestion.
Yeah. Man, that's a good point. That's a very good point. That's the there is a, because when I interact with people, even younger people, like if they're like 18, 19, 20 years old, like I want to learn from them, you know, and I usually look at them not as like a superior, you know, or like not inferior. I don't look at them as an inferior, and I just want to have like an authentic conversation of like, what can I learn from you? But then I take that same model, and even if it's people in their 50s and their 60s and they're like professionally successful, is like, I just want to have a conversation with you, like we're doing right now, right? But that you can't just, some people will not entertain that, like Korean people, you know, definitely. Is it's speaking freely like we are right now is not as common a practice. Maybe it's becoming more common, and it just depends on the individual as well. But I feel like for the most part, I feel some sort of tension, you know, when I just have like regular conversation with people that are older than me, which is a little bit unfortunate, because in the States, I mean, I worked in finance, right? And so that's a very hierarchical environment. And there is also like this level of respect where you can't just have casual conversations in a work environment. But outside of a work environment, like even when I was doing podcasting, right, is like I'd send a cold email out to like a pretty successful startup CEO. And when I would have a conversation with them, it would feel like just a normal conversation, you know? And even though I realized like, okay, they have become very successful, they're in like a position of power to some extent, it's not like that weighed on the type of dialogue that we could have. And I feel like that's one of the things which is most difficult for me to adapt to.
Like to talk to older people, like, or position of power people.
Like you can tell they feel some sort of a little bit of entitlement, or like you need to respect me just because I'm in this position. Right. And I have you know, some issues with that, or it's like a hard time for me to just say like, okay, you know. It's
definitely like when, for example, Trump is very exemplary. How he just went and talked to different podcasters, and like Aiden Ross, who's like 3 times, you know, younger than him, and they just have a casual conversation. I mean, it's not really that casual. He's not like cussing or like swearing at him. But it's still like, yeah, Mr. Trump, I support you and stuff like that. It's like talking to a man, like talking to a guy, to a dude. But I cannot imagine that happening in any other country. Not only Korea, to be fair, but in Korea, I cannot imagine that at all. Like, if there is a timeline, let's say Russia will get there like in 30, 40 years, let's say. And then I would say Korea will take double that time. It will take 80 years to change to that point. Speaking of time, what do you think
How
about
are we doing on time?
That too?
Are
we good?
Yeah, we're good. We're good for another like 30 minutes. So
okay.
We're okay.
I was thinking like, what do you think about demography?
What do you mean demography?
Like Korean birth rates and everything, because it's a pretty hot topic.
Yeah, it is a hot topic. I don't know if I know. I understand the. I mean, I understand what the issue is, but I don't know like how. What the root cause is and how you could fix something like that. Because even though it's an issue in Korea, it's also an issue, you know,
in developed countries.
Developed countries as well. But in Korea specifically, it seems like the career dynamics plays a part, where like with women in the workforce and them trying to like work culture here is so insane.
It's brutal.
You know,
it's brutal.
And so it's like, how do you have time to raise a family if you decide that you want to continue to work? It's like you don't.
Great
right?
question. Yeah.
And it also seems like just the amount of divisiveness there is between girls and guys is pretty crazy.
Oh, I really want to talk to you about this. Like the division between. Are you saying like division between the guys and girls?
The gender divide.
The gender divide.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
So I mean, I guess like when you were saying what cultural differences surprised you, you know, like even in the U.S., I think there's some divisiveness between girls and guys. But here it seems like so much thicker, so much stronger. Where it seems like a lot of the women try and support more, let's say, politically progressive, like liberal causes, and then the guys are like, it's very subtle, but it's like conservative, and there's like a little bit of anger or something, you know, underneath, you know. And when I first got here and I just like have conversations with people, it was interesting to see that coming up again and again and again.
Yeah.
Just noticing like if there are like women that gather and have conversation, sometimes they're just like complaining about guys, and I feel like with guys it's the same thing.
Yeah,
you know.
Exactly.
So I don't know. What do you see the same thing in your social
with my
circles?
colleagues, and they tend to like male colleagues tend to talk about like girls, and then I didn't hang out with female colleagues though. It's this divide is already apparent at this level. Like they don't really invite you to girls' nights out, like,
right?
Understandably so.
Yes.
But when you gather together, they start talking about the relationships dynamics, and they like it doesn't get to the point of a heated argument, but there are some differences. Yeah, it's like, for example, when I talk to the guys, the colleagues, male colleagues, they brought up some problems in their relationships and stuff, and they're like, yeah, it's all the rage right now, like for girls to be that and stuff like that. So there were a little bit of stereotypes, but also a bit of like truth thrown in. So like, oh, this is because of that, and like factual, you know, some kind of analysis behind that. So I think, yeah, there is certainly a divide. I can't really pinpoint that. It's a lot of things.
Yeah, and that's the hard thing for me too, is like what would the solution be, or like how would it improve? The natural thing to me is like have conversations with people, you know, but that is also not really just a common thing to do. Like we're doing now. You know, and
definitely.
That is also why
kind of sensitive topic to them too.
Yes.
You
don't
want to be like, you know, sexist or something.
Yeah. I think this is the other thing that I've noticed. Like as you were asking me about what cultural differences do you notice, I think they were probably most apparent in the first few months when I got here. But then I started to treat them as normal as well. But one of the things that I noticed was in terms of political viewpoints is, you know, people in the U.S. speak pretty freely and quite aggressively with other people about their political viewpoints, and oftentimes they will make it known very early on in the conversation.
Yeah, they're calling like people like liberals, like libtards and stuff like that. And then, okay. Wow.
Yeah, but I feel like here in Korea, it's like you kind of isolate that to one part of your life, right? It's like you may have political views and you might be like very kind of like an activist in some areas, but you keep that segmented into this part of your life, and you don't just like talk about that in the open and express those viewpoints in other social environments.
I have to disagree here. It depends on like how close you are with people, because with colleagues, you can, like if you're close enough with colleagues, you can talk to them freely, pretty freely about that.
But what if you're close enough, right?
Like, what gets you close enough is basically like you subtly, you know, just blend in, like just be there, always be funny, always be okay, always be reasonable and stuff, and then they start to trust you and open up to you.
But aren't there these like taboo topics that people usually try and avoid or don't talk about?
Well, definitely, like sex is one of them. Like you don't talk about sex that much, even though some people do. I hear people around me sometimes, you know, talking about that in the open, and I'm like, are you really Korean? Like that's really I don't know. It's like it's a dynamic that's been changing since I first came here. Back then, I wasn't really that good at Korean, but maybe I just didn't hear that much exposure back then about this topic. So some other taboo topics Well, definitely, if you are liberal and if you have two people in the room which have different political views, the whole room probably will not talk about political views. They will, out of nunchi, out of the sense, they will just stop doing that because then it will put one person in this weird position. So definitely, it's like taboo topics are very situational. With guys, you can talk about pretty much everything, like real friends. And usually, people define that 친구, that friend type, as like middle school friends. For some reason, or kunde, the army friends, so the ones you serve together with.
Yeah.
So they can talk about anything, man. There is no taboo topic among them. It's girls, it's cars, it's like whatever.
But that makes more sense, right? As like amongst those tight knit friends, of course you should be able to talk about anything. But I don't know, in terms of the let's say infertility issues, right? The birth rate issues that you, from your perspective, in terms of the causes, like, I guess, what are your thoughts on the whole situation?
Oh man, it's I remember we talked about that last time, and it lasted like for 2 hours. The conversation, right? It was a pretty long conversation. I think, damn. Well, one of the reasons is definitely like the women entering workforce. It just I like nobody's really against it. It's like more money, more inclusion, like everything. Like nobody can be against it. It's just practically reduces the time you can spend on your child.
Right.
And I believe Korean people are taking good care of their children in terms of like devoting time. I'm not sure about like their specific practices how to upbring children, but I'm pretty sure they spend a lot of time like just interacting like caring about your kid, but maybe not on an interpersonal level, like caring about your kid as in like how was your day and stuff. That's the topic for drama, like in drama you see a lot of kids that are neglected and anything like that. But in terms of like sending your kid to school, sending your kid to a hagwon, to a cram academy or something like that, or making sure that your kid like attends as many events as possible, when they can learn some like piano or stuff, music courses, anything. So in that regard, you should dedicate a lot of time to your kid, right? Just basically to manage all these things, like manage all the payments and stuff. It's a lot of bureaucracy. So I think that is one of the problems. And also the problem is rising cost of living. It's just so expensive to live in Seoul, and nobody wants to live outside of Seoul. Like the government is encouraging people like go somewhere else, not Seoul. Like Seoul is overcrowded. And when I first came from Busan here, I was appalled. I was like, how many people are there in the streets?
Oh, really?
Because Busan is like, you don't really run into people a lot. It's quite crowded sometimes, but it's pretty free. Like you can walk. But here sometimes you just stand like that, like fish in the barrel. So I think that too. And as you said, the division between men and women is like both complaining about each other. And one interesting thing I noticed is that the same dynamic happens outside of Korea too with ethnic Koreans. Sometimes there's just like this mutual hatred that occurs for some reason. And even my brother was an example of that. He was like, yeah, I'm not really into Korean girls. They're all, all about money and like very pragmatic. And then, like some of my ethnic Korean friends too, they were like, no, I'm never gonna date a Korean. And I was like, why? What was the problem? And girls were saying that Korean guys are greedy. They're really like greedy. They don't, pay attention to their girlfriends and stuff. And then guys were complaining about girls being all about money, all about like chasing success, chasing money. So this division is present outside of Korea too. And I'm starting to wonder, is it something like in culture? Is it something in our DNA? I'm not sure. Did you experience anything like that?
It seems like the competitive dynamic, you can just like feel that,
competition between like individuals.
I feel like there's many layers to it, but the thing is, this is also like pretty prevalent in U.S. culture as well in general, in terms of like U.S. They're very ambitious, right? Especially if you're in like the tech startup ecosystem, anything business or corporate is like you have a lot of people that are very competitive that are going after it. But I was talking to a Korean American person who has spent the last like 2 or 3 years in Germany, and she was basically telling me how it was kind of like a eye-opening experience for her because their value sets, their priorities.
Wait, what was dating?
Her work life.
Work life.
Yes. Culture in general, right? Is like she spent time in Korea, she spent time in the US, and in both of those environments, there was always a lot of pressure, right? A lot of like social pressure.
Right.
And in like Germany or in Europe in general is like the whole work environment is like work is a piece of your life. It is a part of your life, but it isn't the entirety of your life, right? Or the whole like
work-life balance.
Yeah, work-life balance is like some people work in order so that they can live, and other people live just to work. Right. And that distinction was a pretty interesting one to me. And I feel like I see that all the time, where it's like if you're always trying to just get ahead and are so career-oriented, then the familial stuff, it becomes a second, third, fourth tier priority. And then if you layer on top of that, cost of living, opportunity cost of having a kid versus not, the fact that if you do have a kid and you want them to succeed in this culture, that you have to spend like insane amounts of money, and then you add on the gender divide issue, it's like it's so many complex things at once. And then I think there's also like a feedback loop where and I see this in the States as well, like because I went to school in the Bay Area, right? And going to somewhere like Stanford, you have a lot of career-driven people. But in the Midwest, it's a very different type of like cultural values, like in the Chicagoland area, in like Indiana, Iowa, right? It's more like familial values. And so you notice even in the demographics there is that in the Midwest, you might have people that get married at like 20, 21 years old, and then they have kids like right away.
Right.
And it's just like normal. Right. But then like my friends that are on the West Coast or my friends that are in New York City that are much more career driven and like focused on their career ambitions, it's like that isn't even a thought at that point in time when they're in their early 20s, right? They're thinking about maybe in their 30s, maybe late 30s, they feel like they have their whole life ahead of them. And it's tricky because then if you are career oriented and you do want to get ahead, then especially if you're a girl, having a kid really disrupts a lot of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's quite tricky, but I see a lot of those issues that people experience in the U.S. like heightened in Korea. Seems like to an even greater extent.
Yeah, those are great points. I think you brought up something I wanted to elaborate on, like the perception that you have to spend a lot of money on your kid. It's not exactly true, but it is true in a way that people just take it as a given, take it as a fact that once you have a kid, you have to send them to Yuchuan, to the kindergarten, and then to a private school if possible, and if not private school, like high level school, and pay a shit ton of money for cram schools.
Yes.
So which is not actually a given. It's not mandatory for you to do that. But the whole society thinks it's mandatory for you to do that, and that's why the whole cram school business is booming in Korea. It's like one of the biggest businesses, I think, outside of chaebol businesses. It's definitely like education business, and they pay a lot of money for that. Like, my girlfriend works at a private school, and I heard that they pay like $30,000 per year to educate their kid for just one child. $30,000 per year, man. That's insane because my parents didn't pay anything for my education.
Yeah.
I never needed any additional education. I was just like, having good grades, and they were pretty confident in my future. I really never went to a cram school, not even once, only for Korean language. And it's crazy for me to think that people here are so entrenched in this thinking that, because everyone else is doing that, I cannot, like, my kid cannot excel unless they do that too.
Right.
Because in America, I believe a lot of kids are homeschooled and they're doing well, right?
Well,
in terms of education.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if a lot of the overall population in terms of the kids that are being educated, but there are a lot of people that choose to homeschool.
Yeah.
And like even for me, my parents homeschooled me for a brief period of time as well.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes.
And you didn't suffer because of it.
Right. But that is also, I feel like a cultural difference is it's seen as kind of weird in the States of like you're going to homeschool your kids. That's a pretty radical thing to do.
Yeah.
But I feel like doing that in Korea is even way more radical. It's like you're pulling your kid out of society to some extent.
Exactly.
I think the other aspect in terms of the feedback loop is, and I would be curious to know if the Korean diaspora population in like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, if they're having any issues with like, you know, birth
Fertility.
rates and all that stuff as well. Because, and the reason why I ask is like, it seems there's some sort of a feedback loop that feeds on itself where it's, okay, I'm part of, let's say, a group of 100 people, and they're like acquaintances and friends and all that stuff, and they're all between the ages of like 20s and 30s, right? And let's say like 90% of them are having kids. Then I'm going to have a kid too, right? It's like, what's the probability that I'm going to have a kid? It's probably pretty high, right? If I want to continue to feel like I'm part of my cohort, right? But like, what's the probability of you deciding to just like have a kid and like disrupt your life when all of your peers are not having kids? You know, you feel like you're on an island. You know?
Yeah, you're so right about this. You're so right about this. Yeah.
And so that's what I feel like is probably happening to some extent. Like I have an older brother and an older sister. Both of them live now in the same kind of geographic area. They live like a 10-minute drive away from each other. And my older brother had a kid. My older sister had a kid. My older brother had another kid. My older sister had another kid. And so it's like, I feel like the social context actually matters a lot as well.
Especially for a country like Korea, a society like Korean.
Yeah.
Yeah. When they constantly look at each other and like try to copy, try to learn from each other.
Yes.
Definitely that plays a role. Yeah.
And it's also like that's why it makes the problem so much harder to solve, right? Is because if you have all of these like structural social issues with the birth rates and all of that stuff,
it has to be a scale solution.
Yes.
Which is
and
really
as you start to like falter or as you start to lose ground, the probability that it gets worse and worse and worse seems to get higher and higher and higher. Like you kind of dig yourself into a hole.
Yeah.
You know? Do you know if like in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, the Korean populations there do they have anything going on with their birth rate issues or not really?
Not that much. That much.
Yeah.
Like they get married in Kazakhstan, but like the feedback loop in Kazakhstan is quite okay because Kazakhstan is mostly Muslim, and Muslim population tends to get married quite early, like 20, 23, 22. One of my classmates got married at 18. Another classmate got married, like mostly girls, but still they got married like 19, 20.
Yeah. That's why it's much more a social dynamic than it is just an economic one. Right? Because like there I mean, from a cost perspective, if you're trying to keep up socially, it's a different equation because they're not in Korea, right? Yeah. Where there's like these different types of pressures.
Right.
But it's not like it's inexpensive or it's not like they have like just money to be having kids and kids and kids,
it's
right?
not like some may argue that, you know, Kazakhstan's like you can just let your kid just roam around for free and not do anything. No, it's pretty expensive to raise a kid in Kazakhstan too, in local money too.
Yes.
Of course, like when compared, you know, the pure like the number itself is not that big to raise a kid, but still it's like taking into consideration the local money value itself, like the local market, the local economic situation, it's pretty expensive. So now that I think about this, my ethnic Korean friends mostly are married.
Are they?
Mostly are married at this point. Yeah, one got married when he was like 22. Another got married 3 years ago, and one is married in April. My good friend. Another one is thinking about marriage. He's like currently working at EY, and that's why it's like pretty difficult for him to, you know, to think about marriage. But he's thinking still, because everyone is married, and he's like, yeah, I'm getting old, and I'm like, old? You're 27, man. Like in Korea, you would be a baby, bro. Like, in Korea, nobody would even ask you to marry because marriage would be like 30 plus question, you know? Yeah, definitely one of the aspects. I think like the whole Korean dating situation and like the marriage situation, I have a different perspective rather than, you know, just blaming the government or blaming the economic situation, blaming all the other external factors. I think it's internal too. Like it's related to the division. It's related to hatred towards the other gender. Like, you know, it feels like red pill here took roots. Like the whole red pill movement.
Yes.
It did take roots here.
Well, I think that is one thing that very much surprised me.
Yeah.
Is there are also some guys, like young guys, who are like blindly just like enthusiastic,
just reciting that.
Specifically about like Trump and like Elon Musk and all that stuff as well. Because I think like I mean, there are things to learn from all like leaders, right?
Yeah.
But then there's a thing where you kind of just choose, this is my guy. I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to stop thinking. And I'm just going to root for this guy.
Yeah, just like blind faith.
Yeah.
I know sometimes like blind faith in a leader can be okay if the leader is okay, if the leader is great. But
Yes.
I think still you shouldn't be blindly like, following. Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah.
Yes. And I was surprised to see that there were some people here that were following U.S. politics even a lot more closely than I was,
Right.
and were super passionate about it.
They're so passionate about Elon, like about the whole thing.
Yes.
With Doge, yeah.
It's kind of like a Messiah complex dynamic of like, this person's going to save the world.
Right.
And that was something that I was like, I didn't even realize was a thing here. But it seems like a lot of young guys that I have come across are, they were like all in on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I noticed a little, like, to add on top of that, it's also some cliches that are being passed around, and they influence people in a bad way. And the whole drama thing, dramas are much more like they're still better than Hollywood, melodrama, like romantic comedies, movies, because rom-coms really give you a wrong perception of love, of what it should be.
Yeah.
They really give you the wrong perception.
Yeah.
But dramas, I thought they would be better because it's like at least one season of their development of relationship. But then it's also not good. It's also very bad for your relationship dynamics, like realizing how to be in a relationship.
Yep.
Because drama, generally, like, there are 10 episodes, right?
Yep.
In one season. 9th episode, they kiss, or maybe hold hands. 10th episode, they kiss. And then after that, you don't see how they interact with each other. And that, I think, is interpersonally personal problem of how young people perceive relationships. Because I was in relationships with local girls, with Korean girls. And I say, like, the whole thing of there is the saying that there is a lot of fish in the sea.
Yes.
And it gets, like, it's a cliche that gets brought up every single time somebody breaks up. It's the most, like, prominent cliche. People just throw it at each other like, there is a lot of fish in the sea, man, don't worry. And guys are, like, really, I think Korean guys are, initially they are not that, emotional, like, outgoing. They're, like, sometimes reserved, quite reserved,
Yep.
because of mentality, because of, like, the upbringing. But also then, when it comes to relationships, they're like shit. They're really bad advisors to each other. They really don't give constructive advice. They just say, let's just get drunk. Just forget about it. And the whole trauma thing, it gets accumulated. Like, all the people, like all the young people I came across with they all had several relationships at this point. And it's rare to see a person who's stuck with the same person since, like, high school, which is quite prominent in my country, let's say. Or maybe in the United States, I don't know. Like, you stick with the same person and you just get married naturally, like, have family and stuff. I'm still to find a person like that who's stuck with the same person, or maybe not even stuck with the same person, but has this mindset of, yeah, I'm going all in for the relationship. I'm, like, really trying to make it work. Most of the people I met, they're like, oh yeah, she's just one girlfriend. Like, she's just another girlfriend. And to me, it sounds like crazy. I know it's like the predominant, attitude towards relationships nowadays.
Yeah.
But still, it's like so prominent in Korea. They throw the cliche at each other. Like, it's just another girlfriend. Don't worry about that. But if you don't process your thoughts, your emotions, you don't really learn, right? You don't really, like, release. You don't really get a closure. And that's what I see a lot in young people. They have a lot of trauma here. Like, a lot of relationship trauma. Like, the whole thing about, and the relationship dynamic is different too. The some period. Some period is like when you're
What is it
talking,
called? Some?
Like, some. Yeah, it's talking, but you're not really in a relationship officially. And there are people that are famous, like, there is a group of people that are famous for chasing the some. Always chasing the pre-relationship, like, pre-dating period. And once they are in dating, they become bored and they drop out of it. And the whole thing that it became an actual group with a name is crazy to me. Like, how can you have a group of people who chase some?
Yeah.
I forgot the name, but still, it's like one friend brought it up to me. It's a crazy dynamic in relationships here.
Yeah. That the cliche that you mentioned, there's always more fish in the sea.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like the technological dynamic made that even a much more difficult issue, right? Because it's always like, like you said, in terms of like high school sweethearts, right? That is a lot less common nowadays. And you wonder how much of it is there are always more options, and a lot of those options are like online. At least this is an issue in the West, you know,
Yeah.
like in the US, for example, is like with dating apps and stuff like that. Is you can go through, you know, hundreds of people and evaluate them on a very quick basis, and so like you could literally see the sea in front of your face, in your pocket. You know,
And you see the fish.
where if it was like 30 or 40 years ago,
Yeah.
you know, and you didn't have that level of like access or visibility,
You had to work for that.
yeah, it's like for the most part, it's the people around you. It's your immediate cohort, you know?
Friends of friends.
Yeah.
You know.
And I also wonder, like, the thing that I noticed, which some other people have challenged me on this a little bit, is it seems like when I go into the subway, I was a little bit shocked by every single...
Duo?
What's that?
Duo, like the matchmaking agencies?
No. I'm curious about that. but I was just gonna say, like, everybody is just glued to their phone. Like, and like, I feel like if I was in New York City, or if I was in Chicago, or if I was in Bay Area, US, like most people would still be on their phones, but they would be like maybe looking up. Some people would be looking around. Some people would be
Talking
like
to each
having a little
other.
bit of a conversation.
Yeah.
Whereas it's every single person is on their phones in Korea, and I just, you know. You wonder, it's like people geographically are right next to each other, but they're living in like completely different worlds, even though they're right beside each other, right? Because it's what their like their curated feed is feeding them. And you see this sometimes in the U.S. as well, where you start to have a conversation with somebody, and then you can very quickly see like all the influences, like the cultural or the political influences that this person is probably consuming to believe and say the certain things that they're saying. And then you have another conversation with somebody else, and it's like a completely different world, and like everything just like feels different, you know, even though these two people might be living right next to each other.
Yeah.
And that I feel like makes it very hard relationship wise to build trust with each other and to have conversation, because like historically that wasn't really an issue, right? It's like if you and I were growing up in the same hometown, and for the most of our lives, like same friend groups, same interest groups, there's a lot more overlap. There's a lot of like mutual connection points for us to like have a relationship, right? But nowadays it's a lot harder. You have to kind of like find, all right, what are this person's points of interest, and what are this person's like political influences and cultural
Are
influences?
they genuine about that? They can lie too.
Yeah, yes.
They can pretend to be.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of work just to figure out, like, okay, who is this person? Yeah,
And especially in Korea, I noticed like on Tinder, I was on Tinder regrettably for a couple weeks. Yes, and it was like just profiles without no bio. I'm not sure if that's prominent in like outside of Korea, but in Korea it's like bunch of profiles, no bio. It's only foreign girls who write bio, legit. And most of the like, you know, Korean accounts I came across is like just one liner, just like, oh, no friends with benefits, that's it. And I'm like, wait, like how am I supposed to talk to you and stuff? And that's why I like jumped off Tinder, never installed it again. Yeah.
Interesting. I haven't used, like, even in the US, I never used dating apps or anything like that.
It's a trap. It's like not worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also like seems like people don't really meet each other that often. You know, like the only context,
the conversion is like
the only
small.
contexts are, I guess, work environment.
Do you mean like in life, not in dating?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. In life in general. Like there's not that many. I guess there are events, right? There are events that people go to
In Korea.
In Korea.
Well, one of like you're definitely one of the events masters.
I've only held 2 events, but I'm honored to be put in that category. Yeah. But I mean, even with like Cambridge, and initially I thought like people want opportunities to connect with other Korean diaspora people. They want like maybe mentor-menteeship relationships. They want job opportunities, right? Like internship opportunities.
Definitely. Yeah.
Maybe like potential co-founders. But then the other thing that has come up is like, is this also going to be, you know, a romantic thing? You know, are people going to join with that?
Did somebody
interest?
like bring it up to you?
I've had it come up to me a number of times, just in conversation.
Not only me, right?
In passing. No, not you. Did you mention that to me?
Yeah,
before?
last time.
Okay, yeah. So there's been a few people that have told me like, and said like, hey, I've been in Korea, but I spent some time abroad.
Oh my
and it's tricky.
I
And
came
so
back
it's like,
to find a girl.
well, and it's not even, it's like the primary example per se, but it is like, it's a
It's in
thought
the mind,
that comes,
right?
that comes up.
Yeah. Oh, remember I told you about this, like when you set up a group of people of
Yeah.
Korean descent in
Yeah.
one room, the air becomes like
But the thing is,
electrified.
we're in Korea, so that shouldn't be anything too crazy.
Yeah, but you still got it though. Yeah, because last time I was wondering to myself, like I was doubting myself, like, did I bring up some weird point to him? Like,
Oh, no.
did Tiger really not, agree with that point? Because I was like, whenever I had Koreans together, like male and female, there was this electrified, dynamic, like sparkling, like are we here to, possibly,
Yeah.
do something like
Yeah.
date and stuff?
Yeah.
And I was wondering, am I weird for thinking that, or like, is it something that people actually think? Yeah, and now I have the confirmation that people actually think about this.
Well, and I mean, it's like a selection dynamic too, where I feel like most people wouldn't be that upfront in saying it. So the fact that some people have just like mentioned it in passing, I imagine there's probably other people where that's
probably
come up,
everyone's like thinking about this. Like
Yeah.
the percentage is different. You think about it 1% or like 2%.
Yes.
And those people just happen to think like 80% plus.
Yes.
And then they're like, yeah, I cannot, hold it in myself any longer.
But it is also interesting why, like for you, with the like the Soviet Koreans that come back to Seoul,
Yeah.
is there a community? Like, do you guys host gatherings? Like, are some of your closest friends also from Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, or is it more like fragmented? You guys are all doing your own stuff.
Pretty fragmented, yeah.
Really?
I'd say there were attempts to even also like organize dating within Korean diaspora in Korea.
Really?
There was an attempt. I saw an Instagram account which had like boosted followers and stuff, but the guy was like trying to bring people to date with each other, and but it's pretty fragmented. Like I haven't seen any community which was specifically for Russian-speaking Koreans. At some point, I was thinking maybe I should organize one, but then like I noticed that Russian-speaking Koreans definitely originally are fragmented. They originally are very independent from each other. They don't try to stick to each other that much. They actually have groups of friends which are like not Korean and stuff like that. Even when they come to Korea, they have non-Korean groups of friends sometimes. But maybe it's because nobody tried to do something like K-Bridge, like you do, for Russian-speaking Koreans. Maybe it's because of that. Or maybe it's because of they generally just see each other, like interact with each other somehow. Like they have some ethnic Korean friends, and that's why they don't need a lot more. For example, I have ethnic Korean friends here. Like a friend of mine, she's married to a Kazakh guy. She is an ethnic Korean. So we talk to each other regularly, and we don't need any other specifically ethnic Korean to join our group of friends. Yeah, so I'm not sure. I didn't really give like a thorough thought to that.
Yeah.
But about the dating dynamics, that's pretty funny. The whole thing about like, are we gonna,
Yeah.
are we gonna find someone here?
And there's a saying, at least like in the States, with certain like social networking startups, of like the best dating apps are never branded directly as dating apps.
Right.
So yeah, I'm sure it's going to be a consideration. And if in the future people say like, "Hey, I got married because of Cambridge's existence," that's
That would be
that's a
funny.
higher reference, high referral.
That would be funny.
Yeah. I think we're gonna need to end soon. In terms of your plans, like you've lived here for you said 9 years now,
Yeah, almost 9 years.
and
8.5. Yeah.
is your hope just to like you can see yourself living here for the rest of your life? Do you want to go back to like Kazakhstan at some point? Do you want to go somewhere else, like to the States, or do any other international kind of stints? Or how have you been thinking through things for yourself?
That's a great question. It's like multifaceted, I think, for people like personally, because I speak fluent English, right? Like good English, and that's why I was thinking, and I applied for a green card in the US just out of like curiosity. Maybe I will get it. So maybe at some point in time I will go to the US to like work or live and just try it out. I don't want to cut off any other possibility and just focus on Korea completely. But if I were forced by the conditions to stay in Korea for prolonged periods of time,
Yeah.
I don't see a problem with that.
Yeah.
Honestly, this society is great in a way that I'm pretty sure this is the only society, and I'm pretty sure it's a feature of Korean people, like in their mindset, or I'm not sure about DNA part, but in their mindset, definitely it's in the upbringing, that Koreans, regardless of where they are, they follow the rules. They stick to the rules.
Yeah.
Like you rarely find a Korean who just goes into a shop, which is like, and starts shoplifting.
Yeah.
Like you rarely find it, even if it's allowed completely, if it's completely legal. So in Kazakhstan too, they were stickler for rules. Like my communities, my families, everyone I know.
Oh, you mean the Koreans there?
Yeah, Koreans there.
Yeah, yeah.
And like they don't even try to walk the line, And here, even if like maybe you heard, like if you lose a wallet,
Yes,
it's pretty safe.
Yes,
it will be returned. Probably it will be returned back to the police, and then you will be found and stuff.
Yep.
Or you can find it yourself. Somebody will put it carefully on the side so that nobody steps on it. So it's marvelous to live here.
Yes,
when you know that you can just put your phone on a table in a coffee shop or somewhere and go away for 2 hours,
right,
come back, and it will be still there. And if it's not there, that's a shock.
Right.
That's like, wow, somebody stole it. And you ask the owners, and they will show you all the CCTV footage and stuff. So I think this level of freedom, this level of personal safety, is unheard of outside of Korea.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to come across. It's unique.
When you were asking me about like the things that stand out coming here,
Yeah.
I just assume that's it's so natural now that I forgot that was one of the things that shocked me.
Right.
But it definitely was. The first few weeks of I was always looking over my shoulder, just being a little bit careful, and now I realize I just don't need to do that.
You just don't. It's so liberating, right?
Yeah.
When you're used to live this way all your life, when you check your back pockets always, look around, look. Yeah, and then suddenly come to Korea and you realize you don't have to do that. In a normal functioning safe society, you don't have to do that. It's a culture shock.
Before we wrap up, you had mentioned that you did some sort of a DNA test, and you found through your ancestry that you have some, I guess, interesting background. Can you mention that before we close out?
So to be honest, my parents were they always recommended, they were strictly recommending me to find a Korean spouse, partner.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they were recommended that by their parents too. So that's why the Korean society in Kazakhstan is relatively not mixed. So it should have been mixed by all means, but it's not that much mixed, even though it's been 100 years. So the reason why they did that, they said we have pure Korean blood, and that's why we should stick to other pure Korean blood to keep the blood okay and keep our culture, keep it going. Because if we start mixing, it's really practical. If we start mixing, our diaspora will disappear. So just do your part, stick to Korean. And I was like, am I really purely Korean? I always wondered, am I really purely Korean? Is there anything completely pure? And I just went to do a DNA test, paid $100 for that. And it turned out I'm only 44% Korean.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what is the other 56%?
That's the interesting part. It's actually not too interesting. It's quite predictable. 26, I believe, percent were Chinese. And 22 was Japanese. And then the rest was somehow Kazakh. 0.7%
really?
Was Kazakh. I was like, how am I Kazakh?
What is what's it? You did the DNA test here in Korea,
yeah.
Right? What was it? Was it through a pretty common do they do any interpretation or explanation for you, or they just give you the?
They just give you the result, and that's the worst part because I'm like, wait, so
all these questions.
Which generation was a Kazakh guy and Kyrgyz? So Kazakh Kyrgyz guy, not guy, maybe somebody, but it was so many generations ago, and I'm like, wow, that's crazy that I ended up in Kazakhstan, being born in Kazakhstan, when there was some remote ancestor of mine who was
fate.
a Kazakh.
It was destiny.
Yeah, coming back, And then, of course, Mongolian a little bit. And that's it, pretty much. Mongolian, Kazakh, Kyrgyz are the 2%.
Yeah. But what I'd be curious about is if you took 100 random, native Koreans, right, here, if theirs would show up as a very, very high percentage Korean, or if it would just all be there's some Chinese, some Japanese, some other. I feel like it would be a little bit more complex than most people would think.
The best part of that test is they gave you the average. They give you the average of Korean, like descent, people all over the world, and like at least in their database, and they say average is 42 to 46% Korean,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
less than half. And the rest is like 20 up to 25% of Chinese, like 20 to 25% Chinese, 20 to 25% Japanese. But they said Filipino also, a little bit of Filipino and a little bit like, so instead of my Kazakh descent, Kazakh percentage, they have like Filipino and Southeast Asia generally. So they say that's average. You're average Korean. I was like,
Fascinating.
wow.
I'll have to do that. Maybe it would be a fun Cambridge event to like do a partnership with like a 23andMe, and like everybody does it, and like you do a comparison.
That would actually
That
be
would really fun.
Imagine like finding some relatives among the group. That would be crazy. Right?
Yeah, that would be wild. That would be
Yeah,
wild.
that's a great idea. I would gladly pay like the whole price for that. I would gladly pay the whole price for that.
Amazing. Well, Dmitry, I'm glad that we were able to make this happen because we wanted to do the conversation for a while. It's pretty amazing that you brought this with you. So thank you for doing it. And it's cool because I have met a few people from Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, but not that I could just have like extended, long, like podcast like conversations with. So as somebody who's also passionate about podcasts in general, I feel very lucky to have crossed paths with you. So thank you.
Thank you very much for reminding me. And let's have another conversation, man.
Of course.
It was pretty fun. It was pretty fun.
Yeah.
I'll give additional thought to like, the relationship dynamics. I'll do my research. Let's see. I will ask my dad if anything like about some comments about
It would be cool. It would be amazing if like somehow we could like get your dad here, or like I don't know. Like he like does some explanation and you do like a translation.
That would be cool, actually.
You know?
That would be cool. He would be up for that.
Yeah. So there's a lot more experimentation opportunities and projects.
Right.
So I think I'll hopefully be here as long as I don't have visa issues for the next year and maybe longer depending on what happens with Cambridge. So yeah, there'll be more fun opportunities to have conversations for sure.
Definitely, I'm up for that. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Dmitry.
Thank you.